You've seen the flood 100 times, the ark, the animals 2 by 2, the rain, the dove with the branch in its beak. But almost nobody ever stops on the stranger question sitting right in front of it. What was the world actually like before the water came? There are two pictures people usually carry. Either cavemen in animal skins, grunting around a fire, or nothing at all. A blank runway, an empty earth just waiting for the real story to start with Noah. Neither one is what the Bible actually describes. Read the opening chapters of Genesis slowly, and a lost world rises up out of the page. A world with cities, with bronze and iron hammered out in workshops, with harps and flutes and herds of livestock, with men who lived for almost 1,000 years, and with something else moving among them, something the text calls the sons of God, whose children were giants. And here's the part almost nobody notices. That world wasn't primitive. By the Bible's own account, it was crowded, inventive, musical, and drowning in violence. It had a civilization. And then God did something he never does anywhere else in the entire book. He didn't just judge it, he erased it, wiped it off the face of the earth and started over from scratch. So what was actually down there, under all that water? Who were the sons of God, and what were the giants? Why did men live for 9 centuries and then suddenly stop? And what could a whole world possibly have done to make its own creator decide it was better off gone? To find out, we have to walk back into the world that got deleted. Let's get into it. Eden, that's where it starts. And most people file Eden away as a fairy tale garden, a nice picture with a snake and an apple. But look at how the text actually describes it, because it reads less like a fairy tale and more like a survey map. Genesis chapter 2 says a river flowed out of Eden and split into 4 headwaters, and then it names them. The Pishon, which winds through a land called Havilah, the Gihon, the Hiddekel, which we call the Tigris, and the 4th is simply the Euphrates, no explanation needed, because everyone reading it knew exactly where the Euphrates was. 2 of those 4 rivers are real rivers you can still stand beside today, running through modern Iraq. And notice what the text bothers to tell you about that first river. It says, the land of Havilah has gold, and the gold of that land is good, and it also has bdellium and onyx stone. Stop on that for a second. Before there is a single villain, before Cain, before the flood, the Bible is already talking about gold deposits and precious stones and named territories. This is not a formless void with 2 naked people in it. This is a world with geography, with resources, with value, a world worth mapping. So hold that picture, because it's the first crack in the cavemen idea. The pre-flood earth, as Genesis describes it, is a place of rivers and gold and borders, and it fills up fast, because then comes the part everyone knows, and races right past. Cain and Abel. 2 brothers, the first 2 children born in human history, and one of them murders the other in a field. We'll come back to what that murder does to the world. But watch what happens to Cain afterward, because it tells you something crucial about the world that's forming. God sends Cain away, east of Eden, into a place the text calls the land of Nod. And the word Nod in Hebrew is built from the idea of wandering. He's sent into the land of wandering, a restless exile marked so that no one will kill him. And here is what this wandering, cursed murderer does with his exile. He builds a city. Read that again, because it's easy to miss. The very first city in the Bible is built by the first murderer. Genesis chapter 4 says, Cain built a city and named it after his son, Enoch. So within a generation or 2 of the garden, the pre-flood world already has urban life, with walls, streets, and a named settlement. By now, people are gathering, building, and putting names on the map. And I want you to sit with how strange that is, compared to the version we were handed. We picture the ancient past getting more primitive the further back we go. Genesis runs the opposite direction. The further back you go, toward the very beginning, the text shows you cities going up almost immediately. This world develops fast. And that raises a question the text quietly leaves you to notice. Who was that city for? When Cain is first sent away, he says out loud that he's afraid whoever finds him will kill him. Whoever finds him. And then he takes a wife, and he builds a city, a place that only makes sense if it's full of streets and neighbors and walls. But the Bible has barely named anyone yet. So who are all these others that Cain is afraid of and marrying and building a city to hold? The text never stops to explain it. It simply assumes a world already filling up with people, far more than the handful it bothers to name. The pre-flood world was crowded long before Scripture slows down to count anyone, and that crowd is exactly what's about to go wrong. Now, there's a detail hanging over all of this that we have to be honest about, because it's part of what made the pre-flood world so different from ours, and it's the thing skeptics point at first: the lifespans. We'll dig into those properly in a few minutes, but you need the number in your head now to understand the scale of this civilization. The people of this era, according to Genesis, routinely lived past 900 years. Think about what that does to a world. If a single person lives 9 centuries, they don't just have children. They meet their great-great-great-grandchildren. Knowledge doesn't get lost between generations, it stacks. A metalworker could refine his craft for 600 years and pass it in person to 100 descendants. Whatever this world was building, it had lifetimes upon lifetimes to build it. And there's one more piece of the setting worth naming, and I want to flag it carefully because this one crosses from what the text says into what people speculate. Back in Genesis chapter 1, when God separates the waters, the text talks about waters above and waters below, divided by something it calls the rakia, often translated the firmament or the expanse. Some readers have taken that line and run with it, imagining the pre-flood world under a completely different sky, a canopy of water vapor, a greenhouse earth with no rain, watered instead by a mist that rose from the ground, which Genesis chapter 2 does mention. I'm not going to tell you that canopy theory is proven because it isn't. That idea is speculation built on a couple of verses, and plenty of scholars reject it. But it captures something the text genuinely implies. The world before the flood may have been a physically different place, a different climate, a different sky, a world that no longer exists to be measured. So here's what we've got before anything goes wrong. A mapped world of rivers and gold, cities rising within a generation of the garden, people living long enough to stack knowledge for centuries, possibly a different earth entirely, under a different sky. This is the stage, and on that stage, the human race is about to invent almost everything that defines a civilization and go almost completely rotten doing it. Because the same family line that builds the first city is about to give us the first music, the first metal industry, and the first murderer who writes a song bragging about it. And once those human hands have built everything, the text is going to introduce something that wasn't human at all. Walking among them, the sons of God and the giants. But we'll get there. First, what human hands made. To see just how advanced this lost world was, you have to follow one family. And it's the wrong family. It's Cain's line, the murderer's descendants. Genesis chapter 4 traces Cain's family down a few generations until it lands on a man named Lamech. Not the Lamech who fathers Noah later, a different one, further down Cain's side. And this Lamech does something that quietly tells you the whole social world has changed. He takes 2 wives, named Ada and Zillah. The first recorded case of one man taking multiple wives in the Bible sits right here, in the line of Cain. The old pattern from the garden, one man and one woman becoming one, is already bending. But it's Lamech's children who show you what this civilization could actually do. The first son is Jabal. The text calls him the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. Read that as the origin of the herding life, organized animal husbandry, people managing flocks and moving with them. This isn't a guy with one goat. This is the beginning of an entire way of life, an economy built on domesticated animals. The second son is Jubal, and the text gives him one of the most beautiful titles in all of Genesis. He is called the father of all who play the kinnah and the yugav, the lyre and the pipe, the harp and the flute. In other words, the inventor of music. Strings and wind, the 2 great families of instruments traced back to one man before the flood. Think about what that means. This world didn't just farm and fight, it made art. Somebody sat down in the pre-flood world and figured out how to stretch a string and shape a reed until it sang. There was music in the air of the world that drowned. And then the third son, Tubal-Cain. And with him, the pre-flood world crosses into something that should genuinely stop you. The text calls him the forger of every cutting tool of bronze and iron. The Hebrew word for what he does is lotesh, which means to hammer, to sharpen, to whet an edge. Tubal-Cain is a metalsmith. He works bronze and iron. Now, why does that matter so much? Because metallurgy is the single clearest fingerprint of an advanced civilization. Working iron isn't something you stumble into. It takes controlled fire at brutal temperatures, it takes ore, it takes technique passed down and refined. And here it is in the 4th chapter of Genesis, generations before the flood, described as an established craft producing every kind of cutting tool. That's not a caveman napping a flint, that's an industry. And remember the lifespans. A man like Tubal-Cain could spend centuries perfecting that craft, so put the three brothers together and look at what the pre-flood world already had. Organized agriculture and herding, music, both strings and wind, and a working metal industry turning out bronze and iron tools, livestock, art, and metal. That's not a blank runway. That's the toolkit of a real civilization, laid out for you in a handful of verses that most people read in about 15 seconds and forget. But here's where the story turns, and where you start to understand why this world was doomed. Because right after the text lists these three brilliant sons, it doesn't give you a triumph. It gives you their father, Lamech, opening his mouth, and what comes out is the second poem in the entire Bible. Remember, the first poem in the Bible was Adam's in the garden, a love song when he first saw the woman. Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. That was humanity's first recorded verse, joy and recognition. Now, a few generations later, we get humanity's second recorded poem, and watch what it's about. Lamech gathers his two wives, and he says this, "Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Read what that actually is. It's a murder anthem. Lamech has killed a man, maybe a young man, apparently for nothing more than a wound or an insult, and instead of hiding it, he sets it to verse and performs it for his wives like a trophy. He takes God's old promise to protect Cain, that anyone who killed Cain would suffer 7-fold, and he twists it into a personal threat. You hurt me, I'll kill you, and my vengeance will be 10 times worse than anything God promised. So sit with the shape of this. In one single chapter, the pre-flood world gives us the invention of music, the invention of metalworking, and the invention of the murder boast, all in the same family, all in the same breath. The technology curve and the violence curve are climbing together side by side. Humanity's second recorded song is a man bragging about killing someone, using the very tools his sons just learned to forge. You'd think someone would have seen where that was heading. Nobody did, and that's the human half of the pre-flood world, advanced, gifted, and turning violent fast. But the reason this era feels so strange, so mythic, so unlike anything before or since, isn't only the humans, because the text keeps insisting that in those days, the human race was not alone. There were the men who lived almost 1,000 years, and there was something walking among them that the Bible refuses to fully explain. Genesis chapter 5 is a chapter almost everyone skips. It looks like a phone book, a list of names, each one having a son, living a certain number of years, and dying, 10 generations, from Adam down to Noah. And if you actually read the numbers instead of skimming past them, it becomes one of the eeriest passages in the Bible. Here are the ages these men lived to straight off the page. Adam lived 930 years, his son Seth 912, Enosh 905, Kenan 910, Mahalalel 895, Jared 962, and then Methuselah, the oldest man in the entire Bible, 969 years. 969 years. That's not a typo, and it's not a rounding of something small. The text gives precise numbers, the exact age at which each man fathered his son, and the exact age at which he died. These are ledger entries, and they describe a world where living to 900 was simply normal. Now, people have argued for centuries about what these numbers mean. Some take them completely literally, that human beings really did live that long before the flood, maybe because of that different pre-flood environment we talked about. Others think the numbers are symbolic, or tied to an ancient counting system we've lost, or that they honor whole family lines rather than single individuals. I'm not going to pretend that debate is settled, because it isn't. But here's what matters for our question. Whatever the numbers mean, the Bible is deliberately describing the pre-flood world as a place where life ran on a completely different scale than ours. It runs longer, slower, and bigger. And there's a detail buried in that list that turns the whole chapter from a phone book into a countdown. It has to do with Methuselah, the man who lived longest of all. His name is the mystery, because if you take his age and you do the arithmetic the text lays out, something lines up that is almost too clean. The text tells you Methuselah was 187 when he fathered Lamech. It tells you Lamech was 182 when he fathered Noah. And it tells you the flood came in the 600th year of Noah's life. Add those together, 187 plus 182 plus 600. That's 969, the exact number of years Methuselah lived. Methuselah died the very year the flood came. The oldest man who ever lived, the man given more years than anyone in history, ran out of time in the exact year the waters rose. And that's where his name gets genuinely unsettling. Some interpreters read the name Methuselah as built from two Hebrew ideas, muth, connected to death, and shalach, to send or to bring. Read that way, his name means something like when he dies, it will be sent. When he dies, it comes. Now, I have to be honest with you, that etymology is debated, and not every scholar accepts it. But look at what actually happened in the text. The man named possibly when he dies, it comes, lived longer than any human being ever has, and in the year he finally died, the flood came. The clock was ticking the whole time. His long life may have been the countdown itself, mercy stretched out to the very last possible year. But there's one name in that chapter of death that breaks the pattern completely. Go back up the list, one generation above Methuselah, to his father, a man named Enoch. And Enoch is the exception to everything. Every other man in chapter 5 gets the same grim refrain. He lived, he had sons, and he died. He died. He died. Over and over, the chapter beats that drum. And he died. Except once. Enoch lived 365 years, far fewer than the others. And the text does not say he died. It says something else entirely. It says Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, for God took him. He was not, for God took him. In a chapter that is nothing but death, one man simply doesn't die. He walks with God, using a Hebrew phrase, vayithalek, that suggests an ongoing, intimate back-and-forth walking, and then he's gone. Not killed, not buried, taken. It's one of only two people in the entire Hebrew Bible who leave the world this way, without dying. The other, the prophet Elijah, gets swept up in a whirlwind of fire centuries later. Enoch is the first of those two rare exits, and his happens here in the darkest generations, right before everything collapses. A single man so close to God that death is skipped entirely. Remember him, because his name is going to come back in a way you won't expect. Now here is where the pre-flood world stops feeling like a Bible story and starts feeling like a memory the whole ancient world shared. Because Israel was not the only civilization that remembered kings and fathers who lived impossibly long lives before a great flood. Far to the east, the Sumerians, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, wrote down their own list. It's called the Sumerian King List. One of the most complete copies is carved onto a clay prism that now sits in a museum in Oxford, copied down around 1800 years before Christ. And it opens by saying that kingship came down from heaven, and then it lists the kings who ruled before a great flood, and their reigns are staggering. The first king, it says, ruled for 28,800 years. The 8 kings before the flood ruled altogether for something like 241,000 years. And then the list says a line that will send a chill down your spine if you know Genesis. It says, and then the flood swept over. The flood swept over. And after the flood had swept over, kingship came down from heaven a second time. And from that point on, the reigns of the kings suddenly collapse, dropping from tens of thousands of years down toward numbers that start to look almost human. Two completely separate civilizations, the Hebrews and the Sumerians, writing in different languages, in different lands, both preserved the same haunting shape of history. A world before a flood, where people lived for impossibly long spans, then a flood that swept everything away, then a world after, where lifespans crashed back down toward the numbers we know. Now, the Sumerian numbers are far wilder than the Bible's, and I'm not telling you the two lists are the same document. But it's worth asking why the memory of a long-lived world, ended by a flood, is carved into the foundations of more than one ancient people. And it isn't only the king lists. The Mesopotamians left behind an actual flood story, older than the version most people grew up with. And the overlap is hard to shrug off. On clay tablets far older than the Book of Genesis, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and an even earlier text called the Atrahasis, the gods decide to wipe out humanity with a great flood. One man is warned in advance. He is told to build a huge boat, to seal it with pitch, and to bring his family and living creatures aboard. The waters come and cover everything. The boat finally runs aground on the top of a mountain, and when the flood begins to pull back, the man sends out birds, one after another, to test whether the land has dried. If that sounds familiar, it should. Every one of those beats is in the story of Noah. The warned survivor, the sealed boat, the animals, the mountain landing, the bird sent out to look for dry ground. Scholars have argued for over a century about which version shaped which, and I'm not going to settle that here. But the bare fact is staggering. The oldest civilization we can dig up remembered a world drowned by a flood, and a single family carried through it in a boat, and they wrote it down in another language centuries before Genesis was ever penned. Something happened at the dawn of the world, and the whole ancient world seems to have spent the rest of its history trying to remember it. Now, we come to it. The 4 verses that make the pre-flood world the strangest passage in the entire Bible. 4 verses that scholars have argued over for 2,000 years, that most pastors quietly skip, and that the text drops in with almost no explanation, as if everyone reading already knew. Here's what Genesis chapter 6 says, right before the flood. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took as wives any they chose. And then, a couple of lines later, it says this: the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Read that slowly, because almost every word is a mystery. Who are the sons of God? Who are the daughters of men? And what on earth are the Nephilim? The text just assumes you know, and then moves on to the flood. So let's do what this channel does. Let's take the words apart, one at a time. Start with that phrase, the sons of God. In Hebrew, B'nai Ha-Elohim. And here's the uncomfortable thing for the tidy Sunday school version. Everywhere else that exact phrase appears in the Hebrew Bible, it doesn't mean nice human believers. It means divine beings, heavenly ones. In the book of Job, the sons of God present themselves before the Lord, and they're clearly members of God's heavenly court, angelic beings. In the same book, God says the sons of God shouted for joy when he laid the foundations of the world before any human existed. So when Genesis uses that phrase, the most natural reading based on how the Bible uses it everywhere else is unsettling. It's pointing at something not human. Now, I want to be careful and honest here, because this is exactly where people overclaim, and there are 3 serious readings, not 1. So let me lay all 3 out fairly, and you can decide. The first reading is the oldest one, and it's the one the earliest Jewish interpreters held. The sons of God are fallen angels, heavenly beings who crossed a line they were never meant to cross, came down, took human wives, and fathered a hybrid race. It sounds like mythology, but it's the reading that dominated for centuries before the modern era, and we'll see in a moment that an entire ancient book was written about it. The second reading came later, and it's the one many churches teach today, largely because the first one makes people uncomfortable. In this view, the sons of God are the godly line of Seth, Adam's faithful son, and the daughters of men are the corrupt line of Cain. The sin here is the holy line marrying into the wicked line, faith diluted until the whole world goes bad. It's a tamer reading, and it keeps everything human. And the third reading, favored by some scholars, is that the sons of God were human kings and warlords, rulers who claimed divine status for themselves, the way ancient kings often did, and who built harems by force, taking any woman they chose. On this view, the sin is tyranny and violence dressed up as divine right. 3 readings: fallen angels, the line of Seth, or God kings. And I'll be straight with you, faithful people land in all 3 camps, and the text alone doesn't fully settle it. Quick pause here, because this is the perfect moment for it. If you're the kind of person who would rather know what the ancient texts actually say than repeat the version from the picture books, subscribe. That's the whole point of this channel. Every week I take one story people are sure they already understand, and we go back to the original words and the oldest sources to find out what's really there. It genuinely helps these deeper readings reach people who've only ever heard the flattened version. All right, but whichever one is right, they share a terrifying core. In the last generations before the flood, some boundary that was supposed to hold between heaven and earth, or between the holy and the corrupt, or between king and God, came crashing down. And out of that collapse came the Nephilim. So what is a Nephilim? The word itself is haunting. Most scholars connect it to the Hebrew root nephal, which means to fall, the fallen ones, or possibly those who cause others to fall. And when the ancient Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek centuries before Christ, they reached for a specific word to render Nephilim. They chose gigantes, giants. That single translation choice is where the entire tradition of pre-flood giants comes from. And it wasn't invented by modern conspiracy channels. That word has been sitting in the oldest translation of the Bible we have for more than 2,000 years. And the text piles on. It calls these beings the Gibborim, the mighty men, and then a phrase that should stop you, the men of renown. In Hebrew, literally, the men of the name, Anshe Hashem. They were famous, legendary, the heroes whose names everyone in the ancient world supposedly knew. Which means the pre-flood world had its own legends, its own mythology, its own larger-than-life figures, and Genesis is telling you those legends were real enough to name and dark enough to help doom the world. Now here's the non-obvious connection that ties this whole video together, and it's a real one. There is an ancient book called the Book of Enoch, named after that same Enoch who walked with God and didn't die. It was written in the centuries before Christ, and it is not in most Bibles today. But it was widely read in Jesus' time, and it takes these 4 verses in Genesis and blows them wide open. In the Book of Enoch, the sons of God are a group of angels called the Watchers, 200 of them, who descend onto the top of Mount Hermon and swear a pact to take human wives. Their offspring are monstrous giants, and crucially, the Watchers teach humanity forbidden knowledge. One of them, named Azazel, teaches men how to forge metal into swords and weapons and armor. Others teach sorcery and the cutting of roots and the reading of the stars. Do you hear the echo? The pre-flood corruption in this ancient book is tied directly to forbidden technology, to metalworking turned into weapons. It's the exact same thread we saw in Cain's line, with Tubal-Cain and his bronze and iron. Both traditions, Genesis and Enoch, braid the same 2 things together: advancing technology and deepening violence, the knowledge to forge a blade and the will to use it on your brother. And here's the detail that proves this wasn't some fringe idea nobody took seriously. The Book of Enoch is actually quoted in the New Testament. In the short letter of Jude, near the very end of the Bible, the author quotes Enoch by name, word for word, as a real prophecy. The writers of the New Testament knew this tradition, and they didn't dismiss it. There's even a haunting piece of wordplay underneath it. The Book of Enoch says the watchers came down in the days of a man named Jared, and the name Jared in Hebrew is built from the word Yared, which means to descend, to come down. Jared, the generation of the descent. The text may be whispering in the names themselves exactly when the boundary broke. And this isn't just one obscure book off in a corner. Two other letters near the end of the Bible, 2 Peter and that same letter of Jude, both mention angels who sinned, who did not keep their proper place and abandoned their own domain, and who were bound in chains of darkness, held for judgment. Neither letter spells out the whole story, but both are clearly reaching for the same tradition. Heavenly beings who crossed a line they were never meant to cross, back in the days before the flood. The oldest layers of the Bible keep circling this event, and they keep describing it as a boundary that broke. So this is the world just before the flood. Cities and forges and music. Men living for 9 centuries. A boundary between realms broken open. Giants walking the earth. The mighty men of renown, born from that breaking. And forbidden knowledge spreading, turning the gift of technology into an engine of violence. It's a world at the absolute peak of its power. And it's about to be the most thoroughly destroyed world in the entire Bible. The only question left is why. What could possibly justify erasing all of it? Here's where most people assume they know the answer. Why did God flood the world? Because it was sinful. Because it was wicked. And that's true, but it's so vague that it tells you nothing. So let's do what we've done all along. Let's read the exact words the text uses for what went wrong, because they're far more specific and far more disturbing than just wicked. There's actually a line just before all of this that most people never connect to the flood at all, and it's one of the strangest sentences in Genesis. In chapter 6, verse 3, as the corruption spreads, God says, "My spirit shall not abide with man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years, 120 years." And people read that two very different ways. Some take it as a new ceiling on human life, the moment God begins winding the long lifespans down toward the numbers we live by now. Others read it as something more chilling and more merciful at once. A countdown, a deadline. God setting a clock of 120 years before the flood would come. One last stretch of grace for a world to turn around. Either way, the message is the same. The clock on the pre-flood world had started running, and everyone in it was living on borrowed time. And if that first reading is right, that God was capping human life, you can actually watch it happen in the chapters that follow. Before the flood, the ages run past 900. Right after it, they start to fall, and they never climb back. Noah's son Shem lives 600 years. A few generations later, the numbers are down in the 400s, then the 200s. By the time you reach Abraham, he dies at 175. Moses, later still, at 120. The exact number Genesis named. And by the time of the Psalms, a writer sizes up a human life at 70 years, or 80 if you're strong. That's our number. So the text doesn't just tell you the pre-flood world lived longer. It shows you, in slow motion across the generations, the long life of that vanished world draining away until it settles into the span we still live by. The next word comes in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, and it's total. The text says God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Sit on the size of that sentence. Every intention, only evil continually. The Hebrew word behind intention is yetzer, which means the inclination, the thing the heart naturally leans toward, the shape of a person's desires. And the text says that in the pre-flood world, the yetzer of the human heart had bent so completely that it leaned only toward evil all day, every day, without pause. That's not a world with some bad people in it. That's a world where the default setting of the human heart had inverted, where cruelty was the water everyone swam in, and the text names the specific symptom. A few verses later, it says the earth was filled with something, and the Hebrew word it chooses is chamas, Chamas. It means violence, cruelty, lawlessness. The strong crushing the weak because they can. Not war between nations, but a pervasive, everyday brutality, the kind Lamech sang about generations earlier when he bragged about killing a man for wounding him. The text says the earth was filled with chamas, and that all flesh had corrupted its way. The whole advanced, gifted, long-lived civilization had turned its music and its metal and its centuries of stacked knowledge into one thing, ways to hurt each other. And now comes the verse almost nobody expects, the one that reframes the entire flood. Because we imagine God up there, cold and angry, wiping out humanity like a man stepping on ants. That is not what the text says. The text says something almost unbearably tender. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 6, it says that the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. It grieved him to his heart. The Hebrew there is deep and painful. The word for grieved, atzav, is a word of anguish, of being pained, of hurting. It's actually related to the same word used back in the garden for the pain that entered the world after the fall. So the picture Genesis gives you is a creator in agony over what his creation has done to itself, not a tyrant enjoying destruction. The flood, in the text's own framing, isn't rage. It's grief. It's the heartbroken decision of a parent watching a child destroy everything and everyone around them, and finally, in sorrow, intervening. And that reframes the whole thing you thought you understood. The pre-flood world wasn't erased because God is cruel. By the text's account, it was erased because it had become a place of wall-to-wall violence, where the human heart leaned only toward evil, where the strong devoured the weak without end, and where even the boundaries of heaven had been torn open. It had become, in the most literal sense, unlivable. A world drowning in cruelty long before it ever drowned in water. And the God described here doesn't do it with a smirk. He does it with a broken heart. Now think back over everything we've found, and the pieces lock together. The gifts came first. The cities, the herds, the music, the metal, the long centuries of life. And every single gift got turned into a weapon. Long life meant longer to do harm. Metal meant sharper blades. Cities meant more people to crush. Even the boundary with heaven, whatever exactly broke, got exploited. This was a civilization that had everything and used all of it to tear itself apart. That's the world before the flood. Not primitive, not empty. Advanced, brilliant and rotten straight through. But even in that drowning world, the story does one more thing you might not expect. Because just before the waters come, in a single verse, the entire human race narrows down to one man. And the words the text uses for him are the key to why any of us are here at all. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. After all the wickedness, all the violence, all the grief, the text turns on a single word. But Noah, it says, found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Grace. In Hebrew, chen. And there's a small, beautiful detail in the letters here that the ancient readers loved. The name Noah in Hebrew is Noach, spelled with 2 letters. And the word for grace, chen, is spelled with those same 2 letters, reversed, Noach and chen. The man's very name is grace turned around, grace reflected back. In a world that had earned nothing but judgment, one man is described with the mirror image of his own name, and it's the word grace. And watch the phrase the text uses for Noah next, because you've heard it before in this very video. It says Noah walked with God. The exact same phrase used for Enoch, the one man who didn't die. In the middle of a civilization leaning only toward evil, one man walked with God the way Enoch had walked with God. And that, not his strength, not his intelligence, is why he and his family are the thread that survives. So the entire advanced world, all its cities and forges and music and giants and centuries of knowledge, comes down to 8 people and a wooden box. Everything else is erased. And this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you, because it means the flood wasn't only the death of a generation, it was the deletion of a world. All that stacked knowledge, all those legends, the men of renown, The forbidden crafts, gone. Only 8 people carried anything at all across the water into our world. But not everything was fully erased, and this is the loose thread the text deliberately leaves dangling. Remember that strange line in Genesis 6. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Also afterward. The text quietly tells you the giants show up again on the far side of the flood, and sure enough, centuries later, when Israelite spies scout out the promised land, they come back terrified, saying they saw giants there, the descendants of the Anakim, and they compared them to the Nephilim of old. Whatever the pre-flood giants were, an echo of them survived or came back. The old world was drowned, but it left fingerprints on ours. And the Book of Enoch, that same ancient book, gives an even stranger answer to what survived. It says that when the giants finally died, drowned like everyone else, their spirits did not leave. Being half human and half something else, the book claims, they had nowhere to go, so they stayed, roaming the earth as restless, invisible spirits, blamed for much of the darkness that troubled the world afterward. Now, that's the Book of Enoch talking, not Genesis, and I want to keep that line bright and clear. But it shows you how seriously the ancient world took all of this, how badly they wanted to explain why, even after God had scrubbed the earth clean. Something of that broken pre-flood world still seemed to linger in it. The flood ended the world. It didn't quite end the echo. Which brings us all the way back around to the question we started with. We started this video with the 2 pictures everyone carries, cavemen around a fire or a blank, empty earth waiting for Noah. And when we actually read the words, slowly, both pictures fell apart in our hands. What we found instead was a lost civilization, a mapped world of rivers and gold, cities built within a generation of Eden, herds and music and a working industry in bronze and iron. Men who lived for 9 centuries remembered not just by the Hebrews, but by the Sumerians, whose own king list records impossibly long lives ended by a flood, a boundary between heaven and earth broken open, and giants, the mighty men of renown, walking in the aftermath. And underneath all of it, a civilization that took every one of those gifts and turned it into cruelty until the earth was filled with violence, and its own creator grieved that he had made it. That's the world before the flood. Not primitive, not empty. Advanced, gifted, long-lived and lost. A whole civilization that had everything and destroyed itself, deleted so completely that only 8 people and a handful of ancient words carried its memory across the water to us. And here's the question, worth sitting with as we close. This isn't really a story about the past. Genesis frames the pre-flood world as a warning, a fossil of what happens when a civilization's power outruns its heart, a world that could forge iron and write music and live for centuries and still filled itself with violence. The question the text quietly leaves in your hands is whether that pattern only ever happened once. That's the whole reason this channel exists. To open the book back up and read what's actually on the page, even when the truth turns out to be stranger or darker or bigger than the version we were handed. If this changed how you see even one story, subscribe, because next we're staying right here at the edge of the flood and asking the question this whole video has been circling. If the giants were on the earth also afterward, then where did they come from the second time? And who were the Nephilim really? And the video on screen right now unpacks another mystery hiding in these same opening pages. Go ahead and click it. I think you'll want to know how this one ends too.